It is that time of the month again where we are doing a wrap up for November. I took part in Indigathon and Nonfiction November last month, and I made a lot of good progress with both. I think I read 3 books for Indigathon and 2 books for Nonfiction November, which I did aim to read more for that, but you know, things happen. But I actually got a few more books off my physical TBR that I wasn't expecting to do, so that was a bonus, even though I didn't really enjoy them that much, but we will get to that. As always, I'm going to go through these, actually not as always, I sometimes mix up, but I'm going to go through these in chronological order of when I read them, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, please leave a like, please subscribe, and let's just get started with the very first book. The first book that I read this month was Rising Above Opioid Addiction by Sierra Tachira Russell, and this was my first book for Indigathon and also Nonfiction November. So as a nonfiction, the author is Native American and it chronicles her life. She's had a very rough life. This is a very inspiring and heartfelt but also emotionally taxing story to read. She starts off in an extremely abusive childhood, physically, mentally, emotionally, all types, not sexually thankfully, but very toxic childhood. She falls into drug addictions, she becomes a teen mom, she goes through some other traumatic experiences, she actually goes to Harvard, she then falls back into drug addiction as an adult, and she finally becomes a judge. And so obviously it has like a nice ending, which I was very thankful for because it was a very sad story. I read this in one sitting and it truly felt like I was there with the author. She describes things in a very brutal, real fashion, and it's so heartbreaking. Thankfully, like I said, there's hope and happiness at the end of the story, and it is a very touching story. It's all about overcoming trauma, not giving up. She does heal through religion, but she doesn't push religion on you at all. It's obviously just her journey of how she managed to save herself. And I really loved this. I think I gave it 4 stars because the writing isn't perfect and it is very short, but it was really, really impactful and I highly recommend it. She is also obviously Native American, so she has that on top of all of her other issues, and obviously they all interconnect. I don't remember the word for it right now, but her being Native American obviously has an impact on her, going to school and how people treat her and things like that, and also the connections she makes there. So overall, it's just a very interesting story, a real story, very brutal, very raw. Obviously, like I said, a lot of trigger warnings for abusive childhood and drug addiction and things like that, but overall, I highly recommend this and I think everyone should check it out. Next, I read Giovannis Room by James Baldwin, and this is one of my new favourite books of 2020, and James Baldwin is one of my new favourite authors. It is about an American man in Paris who falls in love with and has an affair/relationship with a younger man named Giovanni. The relationship is very complex and it explores bisexuality in a very sad and honest way. It is set in the 1950s, I'm pretty sure. It was written in the 1950s as well. So it's a modern classic, and the main character David has a girlfriend who has went to Spain while he is in France, and it really goes through the difficulties of David being bisexual and trying to work out if he wants to be with his girlfriend or with Giovanni, and what his life would be like depending on which partner he chose, and especially in the time period. And I just really love this. James Baldwin's writing style as well is beautiful. It is so captivating. He just has a way with words, if you know what I'm talking about. It's just one of those authors where every word, every scene is beautifully crafted, and he has become a new favourite author for me. The next book I read was for Nonfiction November, and this was The Infernal World of Branwell Bronte by Daphne du Maurier, and this is a non-fiction biography of the brother of the famous Bronte sisters, who obviously wrote Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, The Tent of Wilford Hall, etc., and it chronicles his life through childhood up until death. I have mixed feelings about this book because in some ways du Maurier's writing was interesting and it really kept you captivated and it felt like fiction. However, it's meant to be a non-fiction, so that isn't always great. And I felt like she made a lot of assumptions and imagined that private conversations, she would tell you word for word conversations that would happen between Branwell and his father, and obviously you're there's no way she would have known this. I guess the father could have maybe kept records of their conversations, but I feel like he wouldn't have done that. I don't know, there was just a lot of things where I was like, how would she know this? And one theme she really let into was the idea of the infernal world in Branwell's head and the fact that he could not tell fiction from reality, and I just didn't buy it. The way she was describing it felt so fictional, to be honest. I really just didn't believe that Branwell was this mentally ill man. He was an alcoholic. I don't think he was this mentally ill man who could not tell fiction from reality and thought he was a protagonist in a novel and all this stuff that she was implying. So it was an interesting read, but I didn't love it, to be honest. The Round House by Louise Erdrich is another indigathon book I read, and this follows a young Native American boy whose mother is raped on the edge of their reservation, and because she can't say exactly where the crime took place, the police can't really do anything about it because there's all of these laws about the tribal police, like the reservation police, and then the actual police of the state and stuff like this. There's a lot of complex things that go on that mean that she can't really get justice for her crime, so it's the family dealing with this through the eyes of her son. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of the basic starting off premise, and I actually love this book. I'm so glad I gave Erdrich another chance because last year for Indigathon I read The Bingo Palace, and like I said back then, I really loved her writing, but I hated the main character, and that book was a 2-star for me just because I hated the main character so much. But this one, I really enjoyed all the characters, and obviously her writing style was amazing, so I absolutely loved it. The characters were so vivid and real, and her writing style in general is just so atmospheric, it's so descriptive, but not in a boring or like over the top way. It just like really makes you feel like you're there with these characters, feeling the way they're feeling, and I absolutely love it. I cannot recommend it enough. Obviously, it deals with some very serious topics, so go into it at your own risk. Obviously, it does deal with rape. So if you can read about those topics, I could not recommend this enough. I think it's a really great book. So next, I read Another Country by James Baldwin. After reading Giovannis Room and loving it, I knew I had to read another one of his books because I just had a feeling that he was going to be one of my new favourite authors, and that feeling was correct. So this book follows a group of friends switching between characters in New York in the 1950s. It starts off with Rufus, who is an African-American man who is in an extremely violent relationship with a white woman, with him being the abuser. Eventually, he kills himself by jumping off of a bridge. The rest of the book follows his friends and also his sister, who all have interconnected lives, so all friends with each other, and just kind of them coming to terms with his death and what it means, and the kind of the symbolism of his death for their friend group and also just for the culture. His sister is also black, but all of the other friends are white, so it deals with interracial relationships and friendships, and again also bisexuality, because James Baldwin himself is bisexual, so that is a theme in a lot of his books. I love this book again. Not as much as Giovanni's Room, but I still give this 5 stars. I thought it was amazing. Once again, I loved James Baldwin's writing style. I think his characters are so interesting and incredibly like complex and dimensional, and the themes that he interweaves, such as all the race topics and the sexuality topics, he just does it all so perfectly, and I just really loved it. I cannot wait to read more of his books. I'm definitely going to prioritize them in 2021. I honestly do want to read like every single book he's ever published at this point, because these first 2 that I've read were just so good. So I highly recommend this as well. Next, I read Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence by Doris Pinkleton, and this was my 3rd book for Indigathon, and this time the author was an Aboriginal Australian author, and this was a fictional account of the real story of the author's mother and sisters who were taken across Australia to a residential school for mixed-race children against their family's will, and the 3 of them escape. They walk almost 1,000 miles back home by following a rabbit-proof fence, which was built across the country to try and keep pests into their separate areas and not disturb the wildlife. And they have to sleep outside, they have to escape capture from the police who are hunting for them, and they have to hunt for food. And it's actually very nerve-wracking. You're like, how are these young girls going to get back home like 1,000 miles? But they do, and it is amazing. I think this was a very educational book for me because I didn't know anything about Aboriginal Australians or what their life became once settlers from Europe arrived in Australia. And I don't think the writing itself was anything amazing, but I did really enjoy this, and I think it was very eye-opening and educational. Like I said, I really didn't know anything about Aboriginal Australians or what they went through, or even just anything about Australia in general. It's not something that I'm really educated on, so this was a really good starting off point, and I definitely want to learn more. So again, the writing in this isn't anything amazing, but the story itself was very inspiring and then also very educational. Next, I read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and this was a DNF for me, which I very rarely DNF, but this one was killing me. It's only 145 pages and I had to DNF it. That's how much I hated it. I left my bookmark in it though, so eventually I'll go back and read the last 40 pages, but for now, like, I just could not do it. So it's about a woman hosting a party and the thoughts of everyone that she comes across. It's a stream of consciousness novel. It's modernist. It's yeah, that pretty much sums it up. There's no plot really, none of the characters are interesting, and I do think that Virginia Woolf is a skilled writer and her writing can be beautiful. I actually gave it 2 stars on Goodreads because I should give it 1 star for having to DNF, but her writing is very beautiful, and I can tell that if she wrote actual plots and like actual characters I could care about, then I would love her writing. But this one, like, provided nothing to me. Like, there's no plot, there's no characters, there's nothing for me to care about, so sadly her writing just cannot pull me through it. Finally, I read Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and this is a play about Romeo and Juliet, two teenagers from rival families who fall in love. And I have to be honest, this was so anticlimactic. Everyone on earth knows about Romeo and Juliet. It's one of those stories, even from like age 4 or 5, you just know who Romeo and Juliet are because it's like such a staple of pop culture. And reading this book was just, or this play I should say, it was just so, I don't know, it's just so not that great. As the definition of insta-love, they meet twice, which both happen on the same night. They meet at the party, and then he goes to her balcony, and they declare their love for each other. And then they get married like the next day. And then it's like another day after that they then die. So it all happens within a space of like 3 days. It's just like so over the top, which I guess is kind of the point. I don't know. I just didn't get the hype, to be honest. I also found out, this is maybe shocking news, that Shakespeare didn't even invent like Romeo and Juliet. It was an Italian poem that was then translated into a novel, and then Shakespeare read that novel and turned the novel into a play. So he actually lost a star for me. I was going to give it 3 stars because I was like, you know what? It's kind of iconic, you know, Romeo and Juliet, blah, blah, blah. And then I found out he didn't even invent the characters or anything or the basic plot. And I was like, you know what? This is 2 stars. Like, I'm sorry. He actually lost a star for unoriginality because I could not believe that. And then I fell down kind of a rabbit hole and I was reading, and basically most of Shakespeare's stories, he didn't actually invent himself. He just took inspiration from other stories and then like turned them into plays. So I don't know, I'm not a Shakespeare stan. I read this and Julius Caesar, and I don't think I want to read any more, to be honest, because I don't know, I just haven't loved either of them. So that was all of the books that I read in November. If you have read any of these, I would love to know your thoughts about them in the comments. I cannot believe that Romeo and Juliet was so anticlimactic. I was actually quite upset. Mrs. Dalloway as well, I actually didn't go into it with a negative headspace. I went into it like, okay, I think I might enjoy this. Like, her writing style was quite nice, and then I just could not bring myself to go through it, to be honest. But I did find a new favourite author, James Baldwin, a new favourite book, Giovanni's Room. The Roundhouse as well is also like, not a new favourite, but it's definitely up there. So it was a very mixed reading month, but overall I enjoyed it. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, please subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.